Good evening for this marathon PUAB session here tonight. My name is Catherine Clarkin. I'm a resident of Naperville, have been living here since 2009. And I'm one of the co-leaders of NEST, the Naperville Environment and Sustainability Task Force. Thanks for that presentation. We had a couple of things that I took from that were there's a lot of education that needs to happen and a lot of planning and thinking about diversifying. So we're going to be talking about some of those things tonight. You all start with your credentials, so I'll start with mine. I'm an environmental chemist. I worked on human health risk assessment and data analysis, environmental data analysis for EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9 Superfund program. And I currently run a nonprofit called Accelerate Climate Solutions, which brings clean solar energy to low and moderate income families. We appreciate this opportunity to address you tonight. NEST is part of a bigger alliance called the Say No to Coal Alliance. So we're here representing the voices of many residents in Naperville who believe that our city has a duty to our current residents and to future generations by ensuring a responsible transition to clean energy. All three of those, responsible, transition, and clean energy. I think probably most of the people in this room tonight are not out here because they want, they're here just because of the cost of energy, but because they care about this clean energy transition. The voice of all of these people was heard in the recent election, as is evidenced by a headline in E&E News, which is a publication of Politico. The headline read, "Chicago Suburb Rebukes Coal, Elects Pro-Climate Council." As Councilwoman-elect Mary Gibson noted in the article, policy-wise, it was probably the biggest issue. It's what I spoke to voters most about. Naperville cares about this decision. We cannot rush into it. I forgot to advance my slides. Okay, so this evening we'll be sharing with you a bit more about who we are. I'll then hand it over to Dr. Paul Bloom, who is a professor of physics at North Central College, to address why our energy choice matters. Paul Deffenbaugh, a journalist and longtime Naperville resident, will then talk about why this decision should reflect Naperville values. Fernando Arreola, a public relations professional, will then talk about just a handful of case studies from other communities and other states. And you might want to pay close attention to Iowa especially, which is not that different from Illinois, but has a big portfolio of clean energy. After that, you'll be hearing from Joe Huss, an engineer and project manager, who will elaborate on a vision for clean energy future, including highlighting some of the shortcomings of what has been presented thus far to the board. Teresa Huss, another longtime Naperville resident and experienced project manager, will propose a responsible process for determining how and from whom Naperville gets its electricity after September 2035. And then we're here to answer questions, and we hope to have a dialogue with you. Our goals tonight are, number one, to introduce NEST as a key partner to plan our energy future. Number two, to remind everyone that Naperville has both an obligation and an opportunity to address climate change. Number three, to shed light on opportunities that have not yet been addressed. And number four, to advocate for a process that involves multiple stakeholders and experts before any recommendations are made. This last point is critical. As I said at the last PUAB meeting, Naperville must first define our goals for our next electricity supply and set selection criteria before any decisions are made. Our proposed process will include the voices of Naperville residents in making this important decision. Our proposed process is also clearly laid out, whereas the process that Naperville is currently following often leaves us guessing and doesn't follow Naperville's own rules for procurement and public engagement. Contrary to what we just heard, we do not feel that it's following Naperville procurement processes. So who is Naperville? The work of who is NEST? The work of NEST involves community engagement, creating sustainability initiatives, and promoting environmental stewardship. Our main purpose is to advise Naperville government, residents, businesses, and institutions on greenhouse gas reduction and sustainability based on scientific evidence and best practice. NEST is composed of community members, city officials, and experts dedicated to enhancing Naperville's environmental practices. Let me tell you a little bit about just a few of our members. You already heard from Graham Morin, who also works with Terry Schuster on the cutting edge of clean energy technology and grid-scale battery deployment. I think that they could tell you a lot about dispatchable energy. We have another person, Cami Pillay, who is another engineer, and she manages distributed energy resources for ComEd. Behind me are a whole bunch of engineers, Bruce and Larry, and so we have a really deep ranks among us. And as a scientist, I can tell you that we are evidence-based and data-driven at our core. In addition to advising the city, we use our expertise to educate the community on a variety of sustainability topics, from building electrification to civic engagement to public transit. Our main avenue for community engagement is our public meeting, which takes place the third Monday of every month and draws an audience of between 25 and 200, depending on the topic. Guess what our #1 topic is for audience size? It's about this coal contract. A major accomplishment of NEST was writing Sustainable Naperville 2036, an effort that involved 50 volunteers and over 5,000 hours of research, analysis, discussion, and writing. This report is a blueprint for decarbonizing Naperville, highlighting the economic opportunities and community benefits. It was the subject of a City Council sustainability workshop in August of 2021, and by unanimous vote, the Council supported over 70 recommendations with the goal of 60% carbon emissions reduction by 2036 and net zero by 2050. With electricity being our #1 source of carbon emissions, it also must be our #1 target for reduction. The city's commitment to decarbonization must be considered as we look to the next electricity supply contract. NEST believes in collaborative problem solving. We can work together to establish and follow a sound process, and together we can embrace modern ideas and technologies that will leave a legacy of clean, reliable, affordable electricity to our community, rather than a stain on our reputation as one of the last communities in our region to be clinging to dirty, outdated coal. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Paul Bloom.
Thank you, Kathy. So, my name is Dr. Paul Bloom. I am a professor of physics at North Central College, and I've been a resident of Naperville since 2006. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you tonight about the importance of our energy choices. Energy is crucial for everything we do as a society. There is massive use of energy that essentially defines modern civilization. The benefits are, again, massive. None of us want to live in a world where we don't have those benefits. And nobody is seriously considering doing that. But we have to be cognizant that when we have a benefit, there is always a cost. And we must be aware of those costs. And those costs can be more than just dollars and cents. I mean, obviously, that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easiest thing to look at quantitatively. But it's harder to look at some of the other issues. It could be time. There can be more intangible costs. The use of fossil fuels, and especially coal, comes with immense costs associated with pollution, climate change, and their follow-on impacts. And while these impacts, in some cases, are challenging to assess purely in terms of a dollar amount, it does not make them any less real, nor does it negate their severity. You must understand that if you burn coal, there will be pollution. It is simply the nature of what coal is. It is not pure carbon. When you burn it, even the highest quality coal leaves behind something between 5 and 10% of its mass in terms of fly ash. Fly ash contains a broad variety of contaminants, if we want to be nice about it. Sulfur, metals like arsenic, lead, mercury, radioactive elements. All of that is mixed up in fly ash. Roughly half of that gets used in various ways by industry, but that means the remainder goes into landfills. It goes into surface impoundments. And from there, these materials, especially the toxic ones, can leach into groundwater and into river systems. Just as an example, you know that pregnant women are advised not to eat certain fish. The reason is simple. That fish contains mercury, and half of that mercury can be traced to the burning of coal because it gets into the waterways, gets into the ocean, and then it accumulates in the fish. Other materials go up the flue as gases or as particulate pollution. And these materials have enormous impacts in terms of a broad range of health issues. Populations, of course, near the plant are particularly affected, but mercury and some of these other heavy metals are detrimental to neurological systems, especially in children, especially in the unborn. Sulfur dioxide and NOx compounds can have significant impacts on respiratory system and lead to respiratory disease. And there are all kinds of follow-on health issues. And the monetary costs of these things are, again, they're tough to assess. There are increases in healthcare expenses. There's lost productivity due to the disease that comes from the pollutants associated with coal. In 2023, more than 60,000 premature deaths were attributed, or attributable rather, to air pollution in the United States. 60,000 premature deaths, and that happens year after year. That's one of the prices we pay for burning coal. And I guess the question is, what price do you want to assign to human suffering and to death? And I don't think anybody really wants to have to answer that question, because that's just not a place where we should go. Of course, that 90% of coal that is carbon, that goes up the smokestack in the form of CO2. The role of carbon dioxide in climate change is not up for debate. Climate change is real. It is predominantly caused by greenhouse gas emissions that stem from our use of fossil fuels. Not taking these, in Naperville, we are already seeing the effects of climate change. The direct impacts include an increase in the frequency and severity of extreme weather events, as well as the increase in frequency and magnitude of temperature swings. This, in turn, can lead to serious stress on and failure of infrastructure, and ultimately result in increased repair costs and in increased insurance rates. And again, these are things that are happening right now. We don't have to wait for the future. The future is here. These are real costs. The cost of burning coal in terms of health impacts, in terms of climate change. And these consequences transcend borders. It's not a question of, well, you know, we burn it downstate so it doesn't affect us. I'm sorry, it does. And it affects everyone. And that means the choices that we make affect everyone. When we do not take these costs into account in decision-making regarding energy, we end up generating a massive economic externality, which in turn leads to a market failure. That's how it works. That's how the market works or doesn't work when we don't play by the right rules. The cumulative and nonlinear effects of coal burning are profound and affect us all, regardless of municipal, state, or national boundaries. If we choose coal over other energy resources, that is inconsistent with efforts not only to save money, but to protect public health. And as Paul Diefenbaugh will discuss momentarily, that choice is also inconsistent with Naperville's community values. So with that, I'll give you Paul Diefenbaugh.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting us to present today on what's a complicated decision. My name is Paul Diefenbaugh. I've been a resident of Naperville since 2006, and I'm a NEST volunteer. This is going to be the squishy part of the presentation. We're not going to get into a lot of facts and figures here. You're going to hear a lot of that elsewhere. But it's important to talk about our common values as a community in order to make complicated decisions. After all, if we don't have a solid foundation and agreement about it, how can we make these decisions at all? I was going to open with stories about how my son and his family fled the fires in LA in January, or our best friend's son who attends Warren Wilson College in Swannanoa, North Carolina, how weeks after the flooding, they were still bringing cadaver dogs through campus to find bodies. But because Dr. Blooms explained, we're facing increasing severe weather events in California, in North Carolina, here in Naperville, in Australia, Thailand, Europe. We can all share these kinds of stories. We all know people affected by climate change. But what we really need to talk about here are the values of our community. First, though, a little about me. I've spent my career in the design and construction industry as a journalist. I've had a unique bird's eye view of a $2.1 trillion industry that represents about 4.5% of the US GDP. And the one thing that is the biggest issue in the construction industry is the unrelenting focus on the lowest bid. It is a cost-based industry. Often cost is the only basis for making purchasing decisions in construction. It's easier, it's quantitative, simple to compare bids. How do you compare quality and values from one company or product to another? That's a lot harder. But as a smart friend of mine told me once, if you take the lowest bid, you should hire a lawyer at the same time. We face the same problem deciding about our electricity supply and whether we're willing to accept coal-powered energy. Without a foundation on which to make those decisions, we default to cost-based decisions. And coal, by the way, may not be the lowest cost available, even IMEA's coal. You'll hear more about that later. Make no mistake, though, in this complicated decision, we all want affordable, reliable electricity. We all want that. But we should be unwilling to secure it if we ruin the environment we're leaving for our children. Are we willing to endanger the health of the children in Washington County, Illinois, and Trimble County, Kentucky, for the next 30 years because we want coal-powered energy? Do we want to continue to share horror stories about the ravages of severe weather and its effect on our family and friends? there is an alternative cost-based decision. We can factor in the values of our residents. It's pretty clear that sustainability issues are important to our community, to Naperville. Our values are clearly stated in a number of different places. On the Naperville website, it says sustainable approaches to providing local government services help ensure a higher quality of life for future generations. District 203 has a call to be a good global citizen and has exhibited this by creating a carbon action plan, which the board recently approved. It aims to have net zero emissions by 2050. The Park District has a core value that promotes sustainability initiatives. Our faith community, represented by on this slide by the First Congregational Church of Naperville, asks us to care for God's creation, which includes divesting from fossil fuel companies. Most major religions emphasize harmony with nature and responsible resource use, such as the Christian ideals of stewardship, Islam's call for balance, and Judaism's emphasis on tending the garden and the admonition not to destroy. Those are our community values as expressed through municipal, educational, and religious organizations. The business community also is focused on the values of sustainability. Some of our biggest employers must meet ESG reporting requirements, and they are aggressively taking on the fossil fuel industry. Nokia aims to have net zero greenhouse emissions by 2040, which would be hard to do if they remain in Naperville and we're still burning coal until 2050. Nokia Ecolab will have its Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030, based on 2018 emissions, and reach net zero emissions by 2050. Mondelez will be net zero by 2050 also. In 2023, they reported 48% of the energy in their factories came from renewable energy, and that's up from 40% just the year before. If these companies can't meet these goals, if Naperville continues to provide them with coal-powered electricity, they'll have to spend money on offsets, which increase the cost of doing business and cuts into their profit margins. Which begs the questions, what corporations focused on green issues want to do business in a brown city? The values of this community and these businesses show clearly that our desire is for a stronger sustainability approach to our electricity supply. The elections last week made it pretty clear where the residents of Naperville stand on coal-powered energy. Nonetheless, NEST is recommending to the City Council that we hold public meetings to align on these values. The process to procure one of the largest purchases Naperville will ever sign should ensure that residents' voices and concerns are incorporated into the decision-making process. I said that the question was complicated, but it really isn't. Not if we remember our foundational principles and values. It's only complicated if all we do is look at cost. Thank you for your time and the expertise you bring to this. And I am now going to turn it over to Fernando Areola, who will now present an outline of what the future energy supply could look like.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Fernando Areola. I've been a Naperville resident since 2007, live up in Saybrook, and I'm a volunteer with NEST. And I got to advance. All right. So I'm here to talk about what a modern energy future could look like. And so the whole thing, future, like unproven technology. So I thought of the dad joke that I would tell my kids. What did the past say to the future? Here's a present. No? Tough crowd. The POAB is a tough crowd. So I'm going to focus on the present here. I'm going to focus on the present, not get into anything too far-fetched, and hopefully this is intended to be inspirational for everyone in the crowd. So we're going to talk about what's possible. We're going to talk about a little bit more options, what others are doing, and just risk here, then kick off with a couple quick case studies. It'll be pretty good, and hopefully it'll move along at a good pace, because I know it's been a long night. So the first thing is, the couple of meetings we've had before this, we were surprised and a little bit concerned that we hadn't talked about the big commercial providers as a potential option. So the Constellations of the world, the NextEras, like these are big Wall Street darlings. They're considered best in class, and they have a lot of the services that Director Goff has talked about, like, hey, we could use this back office stuff because we're really not staffed for it. So we think there's potential there. Joe's going to talk about it a little bit more, but that's something that we think is an opportunity. The other thing we haven't really talked about is just best practices in the industry. So we talked a little bit about peak shaving earlier tonight. Peak shaving is a good one. The virtual power plants, we'll dig into that a little bit more too. But that's another big area of opportunity for Naperville. The guys before us talked about the electric service customer choice and rate relief law, which basically gave consumers choice back in the 90s for their power situation. I just want to reflect back on, if we sign a contract with IMEA, that's the exact opposite of choice. So IMEA, the way I look at it is, it's a self-imposed monopoly. And as we all know, monopolies are not good at reacting quickly to marketplace conditions. Now, what did Mr. Pruitt and Mr. Townsend just say a few minutes ago? They said we have a rapidly changing market, it's highly unpredictable, the regulatory situation is changing, technology is changing, demand side is changing, supply side is changing. And I think a good example of how disruptive this can be is, look what's going on in our country the last 6 weeks. A lot of people thought President Trump wasn't going to be this aggressive with tariffs, and we don't really know if he's going to be this aggressive with tariffs moving forward. So here's our situation. We have a rapidly changing environment, and we're talking about signing up with a self-imposed monopoly. That's pretty wild. So I'm going to kind of go off script here. Kathy, I apologize if I get a little bit too crazy. When you guys were talking about the financial stuff, especially when you're talking about commodities and trading, I thought, I was just kind of going through my presentation, I thought, okay, let's say, because I think a lot of the people in the crowd here probably work with a financial advisor. Let's say you went into your financial advisor and they said, I got a great investment for you. Here's what it is. It's a pretty well-run organization right now, but it's not necessarily considered best in class. 80% of what it does is going to be consistent for the next 15 or 20 years. I want you to invest starting 10 years from now, but I'm not going to tell you the price. And once you invest in 10 years, you have a 20-year lockup. Would that be a good fiduciary, and will you invest in that, especially after seeing what's going on in the stock market now? You want a diversified portfolio. We want flexibility. If it's a rapidly changing environment, we don't want to lock into something that's immovable. Bottom line is, because I think IMEA is pretty good, IMEA's model is dated. It's meant for a steady state where there's not a lot of change. If we go into a dated model, there's risk there. And I also think the structure of the IMEA deal right now isn't good. There's too many caveats in there that keep us from having maneuvering room. What if we restructured that deal? And I go on to the, I'm getting a little bit pessimistic now, so I'll go on to the optimistic stuff. One more thing. The financial advisor you were talking about, it wasn't you. That's what's going to be forced on our kids and their grandkids. Going to get more optimistic now. Salt Lake City. Okay, who likes to ski? So a few years ago, let's say 10 years ago, Salt Lake City was looking at global warming. They saw their winters changing, that they thought that global warming was going to affect their ski industry. Also, their watershed, apparently, where their water is coming from, the snows, they thought that global warming was affecting their water. The Salt Lake is a salt lake for a reason, so there's not water there. And they did this thing that's really innovative. The mayor of Salt Lake City negotiated with the person who was the CEO of Rocky Mountain Power to get choice. Same thing that Illinois did, but choice into their electricity mix. So if people wanted coal in steady state, they could have it. If people wanted purely green energy, they could have it. If you wanted a little bit of green energy, you could have that too. The results are this. In 2015, before they did this, it was signed into law in 2019, Salt Lake City's energy mix was 75% coal. The most recent data we have is today Salt Lake City's energy is 47% coal. So I think this is really important because we've talked about like, hey, we have to have some fossil fuels. And a lot of the examples that we see from all the states have some fossil fuels just to keep things going when they transition to green. And I think the Salt Lake City thing is really interesting because basically between 2019 and 2023, they went down about 40% of their coal use. This one's my favorite. I think this is fascinating. Our neighbors next door in Iowa. So Iowa is blessed with a naturally windy climate, right? If you look on that thing, it looks like basically about 2009, they started making a big transition to wind, right? Wind is blue, coal is gray. And then when they did this, they were saying they thought it helped with their economic development, and they thought it helped attract businesses to the area, and they basically created jobs. And it's funny because my wife has this coworker her brother is a farmer. Dad, now this is in Illinois, it's not in Iowa. But the farmer was telling his sister, he goes, yeah, these guys came over and they wanted to build a windmill on my farm, and he let them do it. And the farmer loved it because you guys know, you guys sounds like you're all in business, commodities, right? Sometimes you have a good farm season, sometimes you have a bad farm season. Sometimes you're making money, sometimes you're not. Sometimes the commodity's up. He could amortize part of his farm with a completely different revenue stream, and suddenly it smooths it out. So I thought about this when I was looking at this. I was like, right now with our energy mix in Illinois, we're like arguing over like where are we going to get our energy from? And I thought, what if we looked at our energy source and how we look at energy as a competitive advantage, or where we're doing something that's smart and we're going forward? So it got excited about that. This last point up there, in 2024, Naperville's electricity cost was 20% more than Iowa's. I basically asked Joe, I was like, can you double check that? Is that right? But I think it's fascinating. I think it's worth looking into more. It's like, is it really that much cheaper based on what I was doing? And then I found this quote, and I'm going to read this exactly from Mid-American Energy, who's their power provider. And Mid-American Energy basically said, more than half of the energy used by Mid-American Energy came from renewable energy. That innovation plays a critical role in keeping rates in Iowa among the lowest in the country and giving Iowa a competitive advantage to attract and retain businesses. So when Mr. Pruitt was talking about getting data centers in because they're green, and it's like when you look at these guys, Facebook, Google, they're all going for green power. They want nukes. I haven't heard one of these guys say they're going with coal. That could be a competitive advantage for Naperville and Illinois. All right, last. Aurora. Our neighbor is right next door. I mean, the reason we wanted to put this here is because if you live on one side of the street, you could be in Naperville, and if you live on the other side of the street, you could be in Aurora, right? And this kind of hits on a number of different things. First of all, since it's ComEd, you have choice. Look at all those different entities there that you can go with. They can do peak shaving, the virtual power plants that Mr. Pruitt talked about, as well as utility scale battery storage. We're not doing any of that. And I think you guys are familiar with this, but right now our current deal with IMEA is we can't even do peak shaving, even if we wanted to. It's against the contract. And then the sources there are really interesting in terms of like the incentives, and it's like they have pretty aggressive incentives. So this reminded me of this. I was at this ComEd conference about a month and a half ago, and I couldn't believe it. They were pushing all the chips to the middle of the table on virtual power plants. And this lady who worked in data analytics, who was fascinating, who was presenting, she basically said, you can't get people to do those, to basically get a heat pump or get an EV charger or get solar because even affluent people, hello, Fernando, don't do it, right? And so one of the things that ComEd identified was it's really hard to get people to do that. And so their game plan is if they want to do the virtual power plants, they need that stuff out in the community. So right now, they're putting a lot of data and analytics into figuring out how what's the gateway drug to get someone to start to electrify that way. And then once they get that gateway drug, they're going to go to the next step, then the next step. And then they'll get these virtual power plants. Here's the risk for Naperville. We're not part of this. And it's starting to pass us by. Thank you. It's time for Joe Hoos.
Thank you, Fernando. I'm Joe Huss. I've been a resident for 25 years. And Fernando just discussed some communities that have made the energy transition. I'll talk a little bit about why they're making that energy transition and also discuss some other options. So as you, the next three charts, there's going to be a theme, and they're all about the fact that the rest of the United States is retiring fossil fuels and spinning up renewables. And then I'll talk about why that's happening. So this is from the U.S. Energy Information Agency. It's saying what's going to happen in 2025. In 2025, you can see all the assets that are being retired are fossil fuels. And it also, the headline from the U.S. Energy Information Agency says that coal plant retirements are accelerating. This next slide gives you the flip side of that, which is what's being added to the grid. So on the left side, you can see what was added in 2024, and you can see 90% of the assets added to the U.S. grid were renewable. And then, again, this is from the U.S. Energy Information Agency. What's going to be added in 25, what's been planned. you can see again, over 90% of the assets that are added are renewable. And I'd also call out that 18 gigawatts of battery storage are being added to the grid. And I think we've talked a lot tonight about capacity. I'd suggest the last presentation in their slide, they didn't have batteries at all on the slide that had capacity, and that's how people are getting it. So when the question is, what do we do when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, it's that 18 gigawatts of battery that we're adding to the grid. And importantly, all these slides illustrate the same thing, which is that the US grid is dramatically changing, phasing out fossil fuels that are more expensive and bringing in less expensive renewables. So that transition is described in a cost perspective on these slides. So on the far left, you see an analysis that was done that said 99% of coal plant customers would be better off if the plant were shut down and they got replaced with renewables. It would be less expensive for them. The upper right chart again shows that wind and solar are about half as expensive as coal, and you can find that same information on slide 31 of the CES report. And then in the lower right, another article that says not only are renewables the cheapest source of energy today, but by the time our IMEA contract ends in 2035, prices of renewables will fall by 22 to 49%. As a country, we're transitioning rapidly from fossil fuels to renewables. And like Fernando mentioned, this isn't in the far-off future. He gave you the example of Iowa. These are, the charts up here are the two states with the largest economies in the United States. And you can see that a large percentage of where they're getting their electricity are renewables and battery. And the chart on the right, which is Texas, Texas has a deregulated market, and so that's where the lowest cost producers win. And one other thing, like we had a major milestone last month that you might not have read about, which was the first time ever in the history of the United States in terms of electricity generation, fossil fuels were not a majority of the electricity generated in the US. So fossil fuels fell below 50% last month. So for the first time ever, 50% or more of the assets in the United States generating electricity were clean. And I just want to, since we're talking about the grid, I want to clear up the misunderstanding that some have had about reliability. I think we've talked about it a bit tonight. The regional transmission organizations, in this case it's PJM, is responsible for electricity reliability. Regardless of whether we go with IMEA or Exelon or Constellation or whoever we go with, our reliability isn't going to change because it's determined by PJM. So even like in December, early December, both coal plants were down for IMEA. That didn't affect the electricity here in Naperville. We still had electricity. I want to now pivot to some of the options that CES had in their contract. So this chart's directly from the CES report, and I'll describe those options, and I'll also talk about a major one that was missing. On the right side of their chart, I think this is an important piece to talk about, which is that none of those three options are mutually exclusive. We could do all three, and you can see on the right side of their chart, they're talking about you can decide what the mix is. So as we decide what our energy future and how we don't want to put, I think as one of the earlier speakers said, you don't want to be 100% wrong or 100% right. These mixes are just like a stock portfolio where you have a mix of assets and that reduces your risk. The first option that CES talked about in their report was going with a wholesale market purchase. And we were disappointed, frankly, that CES didn't look at any of the historical data when comparing cost. If you look on the left, that was from IMEA's presentation. That's what the cost was for electricity from IMEA for the last decade. On the right, we did the analysis and figured out what the wholesale cost would be had we done that option. Had we gone with option 1 10 years ago. Every year but one, IMEA was more expensive. And this chart you'll also find inside, we're happy to see, we obviously didn't see the energy law presentation until ours was already submitted. So slide 20 of energy law has the exact same information saying that IMEA, they only went back 5 years, but for those 5 years, IMEA was more expensive. This aligns with what, if you're reading the Chicago Tribune, they've reported that Naperville's rates are higher than those of the surrounding communities. A fourth source is that the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis also did an analysis and found that IMEA's electricity was significantly more expensive than the rest of the market. So all of those historical analyses consistently showed that IMEA was more expensive than the alternatives. So this part of the presentation, I talked about the historical costs that we made a mistake in terms of, from a cost perspective. But now I want to talk a little bit about CS's report. And frankly, it had a lot of significant financial gaps. I think you guys have mentioned a couple here. There are 3 examples that in the report that I just want to call out. First, they compared ComEd's residential rates, but not their commercial rates, which is the majority of our usage, so they never actually looked at the total cost of that option. They described some options requiring hiring staff. Again, no costs at all in their report. The third option, they list owning generation as an option, but again, nothing about cost. They talk about IMEA's cost tripling, and frankly, there's no data, like understanding how they got to the IMEA's cost tripling is just not in the report. So frankly, I wouldn't go at my business to bring a business case forward and say, you should select this option, but I haven't costed out any of the options thoroughly. Some of the options I didn't bother to cost out. That's not how you do business cases. So one option I just want to talk a little bit more about was city-owned generation. There are 5 reasons this might be a really good alternative for Naperville. Pricing's consistent, transmission costs are lower, Naperville could build equity, our spending would stay in our local community, and it also, the concern that was raised in the earlier presentation about not enough capacity on PJM's grid, this supplies more supply to help with those concerns. One of the reasons I called out the transmission savings was because IMEA's transmissions costs have tripled over the last 10 years, and that's at a significantly faster rate than ComEd's, which increased. So IMEA's cost increased 2.5 times as fast as ComEd's did in terms of transmission. And then we were kind of disappointed and surprised that the CES report, when they came here and provided you the report, they didn't talk about commercial power providers. That's who provides the majority of electricity in the United States. NEST met with several of these providers who want to bid on this contract. And unlike IMEA, as Fernando talked about the monopoly, market forces push these private companies to improve their performance. Here are 5 reasons why this might be a good option for us. The price is locked into the contract. They offer shorter duration contracts, so they're more flexible. They provide a larger fleet of assets, and so they get economies of scale. We wouldn't be restricted from peak shaving or power purchase agreements like we are under our current contract. And finally, the Naperville Electric Utility wouldn't need to hire additional staff because they offer the same services that you get from IMEA. So this is clearly an option that we should explore. One of my final points is, like, everybody in this room doesn't know what the energy market's going to be like in 2040 or 2050. These articles highlight some of the investments that people are making in alternative energy options. Just today, there was another one about a virtual power plant being created in Texas. I could put a new article every single day about someone exploring new energy technology. When our contract was signed, when the current contract was signed, solar power was much too expensive to consider. But solar prices declined 90% from 2010 to 2020. So no one signing a contract before 2010 could have guessed that. The electricity market continues to change rapidly, so locking us into a long-term contract prevents us from capitalizing on those new technologies. In closing, my day job, I manage a global portfolio of technology projects. At the end of every one of those projects, we do a lessons learned to see what insights we get from those projects so we can apply them to the next set of projects. Given that we're about to do a new contract, it's good to look at the last contract to see what we might be able to learn from it. The first thing is, from a lessons learned perspective, is we didn't have any pricing caps in the contract. We made a bet back when we signed the contract that IMEA would be less expensive, but we lost that bet. Naperville residents and businesses are paying for the billions in cost overruns under IMEA's leadership. Any independent review says IMEA was more expensive, and we, as ratepayers, not only should we be outraged about the pollution that this plant generated, the worst possible environmental decision, but on top of that, it was a terrible decision from a financial perspective because IMEA promised us low rates and then we got charged higher than market rates. The second column is around the Tribune noting that we were sold promises that weren't in the contract. And when those promises didn't materialize, we were stuck. We were in a long-term contract so in our next contract, we want to look at either shorter contracts or ones that give us early termination clauses so that we can exit out of a contract that isn't working for us. And finally, when our current contract was signed, large-scale natural gas fracking was just coming up. It was an emerging technology. Had we ridden that technology, ratepayers would have saved tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Moving forward, we should ensure that Naperville can capitalize on these rapidly developing technologies rather than depending on old technologies with increasingly high operating and maintenance costs. Now I'm going to hand this over to Teresa, and she's going to describe how we can select our next energy options so we don't repeat the mistakes in our current contract.
Good evening, I'm Teresa Huss. I've been a resident of Naperville for over 25 years, and as Joe said, I'm here to talk about the process of selecting the right mix of energy solutions to meet our needs, because the lack of process is one of our biggest concerns. And if we've had a year and a half to think about this and we haven't come up with a selection process, we're overdue. Because before we can consider specific options, we need to know what an effective selection process should look like. We need a thorough process that will explore all energy options. It has to be transparent so that residents and stakeholders understand how we're making these decisions. It has to be competitive so we can ensure ratepayers are getting the best deal, because we just heard they have not been getting the best deal. It has to be inclusive so the members of our community have a real voice in our energy future. And most importantly, it's got to be strategic. We need to follow a timeline that puts Naperville's long-term interests first rather than being driven by external pressures. We have rushed this process because we're following IMEA's timeline, not ours. So how do we envision our energy selection process? Choosing an electricity provider is one of Naperville's most significant financial decisions, and it's going to impact us for decades. And I have to disagree with Director Roth. We may be technically correct, but when I read our city code, I don't think we're following it. City code says that we're required to use a competitive business bidding process, except in rare cases. City Council has rejected much smaller bids, much smaller proposals, because they didn't use competitive bids. It would be indefensible to approve a contract like this without fully exploring our options. But even beyond requiring competitive bidding, Our city code emphasizes the importance of staying informed on emerging technologies and market conditions and leveraging research from industry experts. But instead of a thorough and data-driven process, the current approach has prioritized extending IMEA's contract without fully evaluating all the available options or conducting any price comparisons. That's not best practice. We need to pause and implement a structured, inclusive, and competitive approach that protects Naperville's long-term interests. We were so surprised by how rushed this contract extension process has been that we looked at some of the other decisions that Naperville has made to put this into perspective. The land use master plan took nearly 3 years. It involved workshops, public hearings, extensive community engagement. In fact, in the plan itself, it says it was developed using an overarching vision and guiding principles heard from residents through public engagement over the course of the planning process. We have not done that. The Affordable Housing Incentive Program was under discussion for 2.5 years, and it remains unresolved. Yet this energy decision, a multi-billion-dollar commitment that will shape our future for decades, is being rushed through without comparable scrutiny. It has been 41 days since the PUAB first discussed this. 41 days. How can you possibly think that is adequate? If Naperville takes years to plan land use or housing incentives, why would we accept anything less for our energy future, especially given that we are going to be locked into this contract for decades? So what are the key steps to a transparent and competitive process? We need real community engagement. We have to give residents a voice. We have to revisit and validate our sustainability goals to align with our long-term vision. City council members need dedicated workshops so they can fully understand the implications of every option. A comprehensive energy strategy has to be developed to define Naperville's priorities clearly. And then there must be a rigorous evaluation of all available options, including a total cost analysis. And we know that this is a process that our newly elected council members endorse, and they deserve to be a part of this. So our first step is stakeholder engagement. And the U.S. Department of Energy highlights early stakeholder engagement as essential to ensuring that public interests are represented. In fact, many jurisdictions require a formal stakeholder engagement plan to ensure community voices are included in energy decisions, and we think Naperville needs to do the same. This means identifying all stakeholders, our schools, our businesses, our residents, anyone who will be impacted by this decision. And then we need to make an engagement plan that matches outreach methods with clear goals and timelines and sets measurable outcomes. Next, we need to validate our sustainability goals. As Kathy mentioned, Naperville 2036 was approved in 2021 with the agreement that updates would be done every 2 to 4 years. Well, it's 2025, so regardless of our energy decision, we need to revisit this. More than 5,000 hours were invested into developing this plan, and it is supposed to be used as a guiding document rather than being ignored or treated as an afterthought. We also need to develop a climate action plan that includes renewable energy targets and decarbonization goals. That would provide us a roadmap for securing affordable power while reducing emissions. We've talked about workshops. City council members need dedicated workshops with energy experts that would thoroughly analyze all available options. They need to provide in-depth evaluations, allow for open discussions, and ensure every aspect of our energy future is carefully considered. Because without this, our decision-making is rushed, uninformed, and disconnected from our long-term goals. Most importantly, we need to develop a comprehensive energy strategy to guide our decision-making. An energy specification team should drive the process of developing this strategy. It would incorporate insights from the City Council workshops, from our sustainability plan, from public engagement, and it would set high-level goals that align with our values and priorities. And only once that energy strategy is in place would we get a structured and competitive process for evaluating our options. And the requests for proposals need to be developed with comprehensive, clear selection criteria. We need to think about decarbonization goals, consumer choice, financial incentives, local generation, contract length, protections for low-income ratepayers, and energy independence. And we know that no single option is likely going to provide everything. So we'll need to look at multiple proposals and multiple RFPs and find a combination of solutions that works for us. And throughout this process, there has to be frequent communication with the City Council and with the public to ensure transparency and foster trust. Finding the right energy provider is not just about replacing IMEA. It's about developing the best combination of proposals for Naperville's future. The City Council and the community have to be fully engaged as we evaluate these proposals so that feedback can be gathered and adjustments can be made. Only through this kind of rigorous, inclusive process can Naperville select the best path forward to achieve a sustainable and cost-effective future. This is a $2 billion decision. Where is our process? We deserve a process that's transparent, competitive, and built for the long term, because anything else would fail our community. We've appreciated the opportunity to talk to you today and to share some of the information and options from our experts who live and work in Naperville. We know that your priority, ours, and the community's is to find an option that allows for a thriving future for our city and its residents. Just this year, we were again named, I think last month, the best place to live and the best place to raise a family. But that recognition comes from the choices we make as a city and the values we hold. And we know that the majority of Americans and absolutely the majority of Naperville residents care about climate change. They care about mitigating the dangers of climate change. We saw that when they packed these chambers just a few months ago, urging the council to say no to coal. And as has been demonstrated, it was further demonstrated in the recent elections, where voters endorsed candidates calling for us to revisit this process and prioritize a carbon action plan. Renewing this contract does not align with Naperville values. And frankly, public trust in this process has already been damaged. News articles, editorials, and as Kathy mentioned, national news articles have called out the lack of transparency. Residents have voiced concerns about such a significant decision being made without following our usual procedures. The current City Council has stated, as has the mayor, that they will not vote on this contract before the deadline. Not a single candidate in the recent elections, any of the 8, supported signing this extension by April 30th. And the newly elected council members deserve to have the time and the information to evaluate such a significant decision. And luckily, as CES affirmed, we have the time. Do not rush this recommendation through in 41 days. This is an opportunity to rebuild trust by committing to an open and transparent process. Because without public trust, we not only damage our reputation and our relationship with our current residents, but we risk losing future residents and future businesses. Because even if we put aside the terrible environmental impact and the harm this does to public trust, the bottom line is that the contract extension is a bad deal. It locks us into a long-term agreement without any price guarantees, it limits our options, and it doesn't allow us to adapt in a rapidly changing energy market. We have options. We have great options for Naperville's energy future. Other cities are doing it. Let's not give up flexibility when energy options are evolving faster than ever. Let's be like those cities that are making strategic, future-focused choices. We shouldn't rush into a contract that could leave us, once again, with outdated, expensive energy sources. The right recommendation is clear. Do not recommend extending this contract. Instead, support a transparent, forward-thinking process to secure a better deal for Naperville's future. Once again, we appreciate your time, and we look forward to having a discussion on how we can work together.
Okay, so we will continue at this point with the questions by the PUAB to Nest from their presentation. Yes, so Jim, go ahead.
Yes. Could you go to your PowerPoint slide that says fastest growing because it is the cheapest? There it is. There seems to be a lot of discussion about, you know, IMEA and its cost. I've heard terms like, we don't know what the cost is going to be in the future. We're locked into pricing that we don't know what it's going to be. The folks from IMEA were here, and they spoke to us, and I asked a specific question. And that question was, what does it cost to produce a megawatt hour of power from the coal-fired power plants? And they told us it was $30 a megawatt hour. Okay? Then they said, well, there's a range, 30 to 35. But they said that's what the cost is. Now I'm going to, you know, take that for what it, you know, I'm going to take them for their word that they've looked at the data. They're part owners of the plant. They know what it costs to produce power. So when I look at the chart here that you've put up, because, and this presumably relates to renewables, $30 to $35 isn't even on your chart. It's below all of those options.
You're familiar with the levelized cost of energy calculation? Where
Yes, I'm very familiar with it, yes.
Yeah, where we incorporate the cost of building and financing the asset?
Well, this is a power plant that's already been built. It's already running.
Right, so you're
This
comparing...
isn't like out in the future, some new coal-fired power plant's going to be built in the future. This is an existing plant.
Yep.
So that coal line on here doesn't apply to Prairie State. But my point being is that $30 to $35 is below every one of these charts. So why do you believe that renewables today or in the future are going to be cheaper than $30 to $35?
So I'd start off with saying the salesperson from IMEA that provided their cost information, I don't trust salespeople unless I get something in writing. There's nothing in the contract that talks about that number. There's nothing in there that includes M&O, maintenance and operating costs in their numbers. I don't know what their number is because it's not written down anywhere. I appreciate that we will have salespeople give us information, but until it's written down in an RFP bid or until it's written down in a contract, it doesn't mean anything. Like I have salespeople come to me all the time and give me stories. I don't know what the IMEA, like if they want to write it down and promise us that rate, that would be fantastic. But there's nothing, like when a salesperson gives me a price and they don't stand by a quote, it's worthless to me. And on top of it,
this was their general counsel
that
told us this. This was their general counsel, their attorney.
Okay.
That told us this.
Can I finish my answer? I don't know how this process works. Is it okay to get interrupted in the middle? I don't know how that works.
I thought you were finished, as a matter of fact.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not finished yet.
But that's okay. No, we don't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
Go ahead and finish your answer.
Thank you. So the first piece I have is that if $30 a megawatt hour is in fact the cost, which I don't think it is, because I run manufacturing plants and I know maintenance and operation costs on assets that are old don't have those kind, those are real costs. The second thing I'd touch on is that again, that we'd want that in the contract. The only that we're talking about the first 3 years of a 20-year contract potentially have lower cost assets because CEDRA requires half those assets to be shut off a few years after those bond payments.
Correct.
Where is the cost analysis? So if I'm making a $2 billion investment, I expect, if I went to my CEO and said, I'm gonna make a $2 billion investment, and I said, no, you know what, I didn't do a cost estimate, he would laugh at me and I'd have to walk out. You can't go into a real business and make a real decision without a detailed cost analysis. Where is that cost analysis? It's not in the CES report, and it's not in it wasn't in the earlier presentation. That's why we're saying the process is so important, that we need to understand what our requirements are, follow the process, and then you can actually make a decision about cost. But if someone has a cost estimate for what IMEA is gonna cost, that's fantastic. If you think it's 3X, I don't believe that. I mean, I haven't seen any data that leads me to that belief. I don't know how you can make, like I said, if I went to a business leader and said, I didn't do a cost estimate, but I want you to make a decision, they would laugh me out of the room. That the PUAB is in a position to make a recommendation without any detailed cost estimates, not only on IMEA's option, but the other options. How can you make a decision without that information in front of you? I'm surprised by that. That's the end of my answer. Thank you.
I have a question. If the price of our director, if the price is $30, $35 for what we pay with our bill, can we say that that's the range of it, or what's going on with our price?
I believe that the statement made by IMEA was that their cost of energy was $30 to $35 from Prairie State, and similar pricing from Trimble County. The rest of the
I would like to point out that even Lazard's levelized cost of energy plots for an existing coal-fired power plant exhibits the same price that IMEA gave us for existing coal-fired power plants.
I believe it's $71 in the other chart, but on top of that, you also have to figure, the earlier speakers talked about the congestion on the grid, and that's why part of IMEA's transmission costs have tripled in the last 10 years. So we shouldn't just look at the price to produce the electricity, but we should look at the total cost that comes to us. And again, nobody has done the homework on what it costs to produce it, what it costs to transmit it, what it's going to cost to our ratepayers here in Naperville. I haven't seen that. Does the PUAB have, did they analyze all the costs for the options that we're considering? Do you guys have that?
I don't. I was going to ask a follow-up question if anybody from the city or otherwise can provide what the structured costs are for the contract that's in the proposal for the 20-year period. Is there a cap on it, or is there a projection, or are we just hearing what their costs are?
Hearing what part of their costs are, because they didn't include the entire cost. Oh, sorry.
The proposed contract extension does not address costs, right? So IMEA is a not-for-profit organization, and their costs are shared amongst all their members, just like they are today.
So I guess I would propose a question to the board of how can we debate what is the cheapest cost of any power when we don't know what we're comparing it to?
Well, I'd suggest we look at the chart that's on the table right there, provided by Nest. These are your other options.
But these are market prices. I think the issue at hand here is to make a decision on renewing a contract, and we're being asked to make a recommendation to renew a contract that we don't know what the costs are for 20 years.
Well, you know, IMEA is not an evil empire. We're an owner or a member of IMEA. 31 other cities are members of IMEA. This is not a for-profit organization. It's not a Constellation NextEra that wants to make money for their shareholders. This is, we're IMEA. We are IMEA. I don't think that we will do things to our, that aren't to our benefit. This is not some third-party organization, for-profit. We decide what IMEA will be doing, us and the other 31 cities. I fail to see how we would believe that we would do something that's detrimental to ourselves, and the other cities would do that.
Yeah, I don't think that that's implied. Nobody would want to do that. But when you talk about controllables and variability in the marketplace, as a nonprofit, you can't control that. Even as a for-profit, you may not be able to control that, which means you're still going to be acting in the best interest of your city, but you can't necessarily control what the prices are.
I think the programs that we've had make presentations to us showed what the price was and what the market was. I do believe that they showed market rates and that. We also talked about a particular graph that CES put up on there.
You know, I heard comments from these folks about, you know, customer choice. Why was customer choice provided for the citizens of Illinois? Well, the reason for customer choice was to allow people to buy the cheapest power they could, to allow them to economically benefit from choice. Well, that's what we're getting from IMEA already. That's a choice. We're choosing to go with the lowest cost producer that we know of. The other statement was that IMEA is a monopoly. Well, of course it's a monopoly. We're it. We are the monopoly. We've made it a monopoly amongst the 31 cities that belong to it. That's stated as if that's a negative, but no, it's not. We are IMEA.
Again, asking Brian, with Naperville's costs compared to the surrounding area, how does Naperville's electric cost compare?
I'll actually turn that over to Mayor Diab, our Customer Connections and Financial Services Manager. Mayor does the cost comparison on a monthly or bi-monthly basis.
Yeah, for residential, last time I did this analysis was, I believe, in February of this year. And for our residential, we are 15% below ComEd customers.
So that's in contrary to what you're saying. So how do we have a conflict like that?
Okay, thanks for the question. One, because when he said, listen to his answer, he said he's only looking at residential rates. The majority of our electricity is commercial. And so when we look at it, we look at the total cost, not just the residential. So, I mean, we have the detailed numbers behind it, but it isn't just us. We did the analysis. You saw the exact same chart independently created by the experts that you guys brought in. And you can see, we also included the article from the Trib that shows that we're paying more. And you also saw I also referenced another third-party energy provider that also said we're overpaying. We know that when they built Prairie State, they thought it was going to be like a $2.5 billion plant. It ended up being a $5 billion plant because of all the cost overruns. The people who are paying for that $5 billion cost overrun are the citizens of Naperville. And now we're about to let the same company, they're going to be the same ones that are going to oversee, not the first 3 years they're going to be on that coal plant, but every year after that, they're going to be buying assets. And they've shown, like, the only evidence we have is that they really mismanaged building the asset that they have today. And that's why our costs are dramatically higher. They're higher than ComEd. We're at $84 megawatt hour. ComEd's at $56 megawatt hour. So we're overpaying today because of the mistakes. When IMEA oversaw the building of the Prairie State, they were one of the owners of Prairie State when we had the huge cost overruns. We're about to let that same company, we're saying, you don't have to put a price in your contract, and we know you've mismanaged the last contract, but we've decided to give you another chance. Like, why would we do that?
So
when we have other options where we can get fixed prices.
So you're comparing commercial versus residential. You're saying our residential prices are less than the surrounding area, but it's the commercial, and you imply, though, that it's everything because of the fact that it's commercial. But, Mayor, could you please answer that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Well, they're saying basically that it is the commercial rate that IMEA charges Naperville
Point of
is much
clarification.
higher.
It's wholesale rates. These are
Okay,
wholesale rates.
Wholesale rate, okay, wholesale rate. Wholesale rate.
Naperville sets the rate in terms of whether the residential customer is going to pay or the commercial customer is going to pay. They set the wholesale rate, but then how it's broken up is a decision that Naperville makes. So you can't just so it's great that if you're a residence that Naperville has geared a rate that puts more of the costs on the industrial customers, but that might also explain why industrial customers have been their usage has been declining in Naperville. That's just a fact. Our usage has been declining, and it's primarily because of industrial, but whether we buy it from IMEA or we buy it from somebody else, we're going to set the rates. They just happen to sell it to us at a much higher rate than ComEd is selling it to their customers.
Mayor, could you answer that? As far as commercial?
Commercial, and just the comparison that I run is it was a full retail rate, not a wholesale rate. You know, what ComEd charges residential versus what we charge our residents. The majority of our customers, more than 55,000 of the 62,000 customers are residential. So they are 15% below ComEd rates. And then the rest of the customers who are like, you know, small commercial, large commercial, and industrial are that makes up the rest of the 62,000 customers in Naperville who are paying, like, you know, the commercial and the industrial rates.
All right, Brian?
So, I would add, I've been trying to find it. We did a recent comparison for 2 car dealerships. We were lower in both instances. In the past, we haven't been lower. Recently, we have been lower. I can't find the exact numbers, but it was a comparison that we were asked to do between car dealerships in Aurora and car dealerships in Naperville. We were lower, and I continue to try and find that email where we did the analysis.
So what you're implying, or saying, or saying your facts show
There are 4
that
different
it's Naperville's policy that sets the rate commercially. Now, are we going to agree that residents get the cheapest rate here in Naperville?
So
or no?
Let me speak to that directly. The analysis that we've seen from Naperville Electric Utility compares the total bill that goes out to a residential ComEd customer to the total bill that goes out to a Naperville, incorporated Naperville residential customer. Bundled into that bill is the cost of operating the municipal. Is that right, Brian? Yeah. So what we're trying to decide is what is the best deal on wholesale rates. So why are we worrying about bundling the cost of the municipality together with the cost of wholesale power? We should only be looking at wholesale power. That analysis is just not as demonstrable as to what kind of deal that we've gotten in the past.
Let me add, I think I agree with everything you say there. To break it down even more simply, when you start with wholesale, and then you got to layer in all your local distribution costs, and you get your retail rates to both your commercial and your residential clients, right? So, yeah, I've seen the analysis, and Naperville on the residential side is lower. What I would say is I would compliment Brian and his team because they are overcoming about a 2.2 cent disadvantage at the wholesale side that they are overcoming to keep the rates low. Imagine if we could take that 2.2 cents and get it down to the market. What could we do with that? In my talk earlier, I mentioned over $300 million over the last 10 years that we've paid in premium to IMEA versus the market. We could take that $300 million and reinvest it in the community. There's all this concern about burying power lines for storm resiliency and investing in local resiliency, because whether we stay with IMEA or not, it's not going to solve this problem of local capacity that if the PJM grid burns down around us, we're going down with it. Whether or not IMEA is up and running down in MISO or not, it does nothing for our reliability. We should be taking that money, putting it into our community, and deploying it here where we can invest in things like reliability and even ultimately lower rates by getting that baseline that we're buying from lower so that we have more breathing room to do more interesting things to improve the local grid here, which is what really matters to all of us.
Right. So I think, obviously, Graham is explaining a very complicated process, but I think this goes back to why we're suggesting this process. So the reason that we're suggesting a process where we do analysis, we actually do, we should have a spreadsheet, just like the consultants had, that has a lot of numbers on it that understand what our costs are. So the fact that Graham and Brian are debating whether the cost is lower and we don't, like you guys don't know the answer as to whether that is, and that you don't have an actual cost estimate as to what IMEA is going to cost or what any of the options. That's why we think it's so important that we engage the community, find out what they want. Do the math, do the actual hard work, just like when I bring a business case at my business, I have to do the calculations. And I'm sure you guys have had similar experience where you're bringing something and you just can't take, like I've got a rough number from a salesperson and I'm gonna come and ask you for $2 billion because I have a rough number from a salesperson. I didn't include the transmission costs.
Okay, you mentioned that salesperson thing again. That wasn't a salesperson, okay? So the whole point that you're trying to make is saying you don't trust what IMEA said, okay? That's, you made that point.
I'm sorry,
you made that point many times, okay? I got that.
Okay.
Could I add too?
Yeah, go ahead.
To be fair, until it's in writing and until we put this out for bid and have IMEA or whoever else come back and state what the pricing is, I mean, how can we compare and make a confident choice? I mean, let's let IMEA prove in writing that they are the best deal.
Okay, let's think that out. Let's say we ask IMEA to give us a price proposal. And they say, we're going to charge you $40 a megawatt hour. We're making a price proposal with ourselves. If the price comes in high, we'll have to pay more. If the price comes in lower than that,
But then
their
we give
actual
other
cost, then we'll benefit from it. Once again, we're dealing with ourselves here. We're going to do the best deal for ourselves. IMEA is not a third party, it's us. So if we ask for a proposal from IMEA and it's either high or it's low versus what it costs to produce or buy, we're either going to get the benefit or the loss.
I think we need
I'm not
to give
seeing
other,
what we could ask IMEA to guarantee price-wise.
well, then we need to give other market actors an opportunity to bid and provide us with numbers as well I mean, this is $2 billion.
I think what I'm trying to imagine what an RFP would look like if we sent it out in 6 months, as Brian said.
This is what IMEA is currently providing us today, and who else in the market can provide these same services and goods. And if it's no one, it's no one. And if it's someone that's more expensive than they are, if they can do it in a different way. I really liked this "we have countless options" slide that Nest added in, where maybe it's a mix. I mean, look at Geneva. I'm pretty sure they created their own, peak generation to offset some peak demand. I mean, that could be part of this mix. I mean, I agree, there are so many other options that we haven't explored. I also was hoping to see more from the CES presentation in terms of the other providers, the CPPs. I mean, I just feel like for $2 billion plus, this has to go out to bid.
I'm trying to imagine what an RFP would look like to bidders. And I think it was addressed with the folks that were here. We'd be asking them to provide a fixed price for power for 5 years or 10 years, whatever the length would be, that starts in 10 years from now. There's not a provider on the planet that would give us numbers like that. That's just way too far out. Strips on the futures exchanges, the liquidity ends after about 4 or 5 years. Nobody could hedge that risk starting 10 years from now. So yes, we could do that, and it would take perhaps 6 months to get an answer or more than that. But then, as I mentioned before, I think we're losing this option, which
I don't
seems like it's the lowest cost option that anybody can even imagine would appear in the future.
I think we should let IMEA prove that they are the lowest cost option through a competitive process. And if they can't give us 6 months or a year to go through this transparency and procurement process, I really don't think they're going to walk away from $2 billion. And I think we still have some negotiating power. So that's where I stand at this point.
I think we've already discussed, and Russ, are you there still?
Yeah, I'm still here.
So when we were talking and asking you the question, also the fact of going out for other bids now is not going to be fruitful, and I've heard, you know, the conversation be, well, if we don't get it, we don't get it. The point is, by extending this process and going through it, puts Naperville's options at risk. And the fact that we don't have a report or a signed amount of money that they charge for their electricity, we already know what they charge for electricity. We know that their costs are set because of the fact they have their own coal, and they transport it with a conveyor belt. I mean, their costs are not going to be what the market costs are. And now we're talking about, this isn't just the past, what we could have done in the past. We're talking about where we are right now. Where we are right now is a company that doesn't have to do what everybody else has to do, and what they are going to be required from the state is going to be less. Everything's going to go up. There's no doubt. And the two gentlemen that were over here didn't want to say that because they thought that was taking sides. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, Lou, I was going to say, you know, if you look at the day-ahead index market for the last, I'll say, 12 years, I don't know how long, again, the IMEA contract has been in place, but it's been a long time. So anyway, but the last 12 years, the day-ahead index market has averaged $30. And that's been under favorable conditions with a favorable supply and demand curve. We had more generation than we knew what to do with, right? We had enough slush in the system that the market never really got tight. The concern that we have moving forward is that the market starts to get tight. And that day-ahead index pricing that I'm assuming Graham was using to compare to the Naperville's fixed price over the last several years, there's just going to be more volatility into it. It's going to be more volatile. The supply and demand curve is tightening. That's the moral of the story. And if Naperville gives up the option on Prairie State and that cost to produce at $30 to $35, I mean, it's a gift, and I don't know exactly what IMEA's position is, but I would not be surprised if, you know, they were happy to see Naperville leave.
Right, because it does reduce their requirements. Absolutely.
Yeah, the other 33 municipalities in the contract will reap the benefit. They'll go from 80% of their power at $30 to 100% of their power at $30 and have excess to sell into a very tight marketplace where they'll start taking a profit on $30 power.
That they'll split with the other cities that stay with them.
Right. Again, because they're a not-for-profit, and as all the owners, they're going to share in that windfall. And I would also say that, you know, when this IMEA deal in its origination, I would have voted against it 20 years ago because of the supply and demand equation that was in place. Didn't need the 20-year price. But today, looking forward and knowing how this energy transition is moving along, there is a lot of unknowns. Whether some may be good, some may be bad, but all I know is that unknowns do translate into risk and volatility. And I think when I think about our ratepayers, homeowners, that they would like some stability in their energy price moving forward. I think the IMEA contract gives that.
Is it too much to ask for some kind of price in writing from IMEA within the next however many days? Because I think that's ultimately what's being asked here, because we're throwing around numbers and we're talking about what ifs, and obviously nobody can predict the future. Can we get them to put something in writing, Brian?
Can certainly ask. I think that they would point back to their conversation that they had in this forum related to their production costs, and then their increases generally related to price index increases. I think we've heard some conversations around, what about maintenance costs and things like that. If you look at maintenance costs after startup, they've been relatively flat, and that's indexed in the red line, blue line charts that have been presented there.
I mean, for this board, is that something that we can formally request of Brian? So we're responding to the people that are here tonight.
We can ask that, and I think what I'm looking at right now is that when you say the wholesale price versus what we're getting is the problem. From what I saw from the presentations that were done to us, presented to us prior to that, was that the total cost, regardless of what the wholesale price is, the total cost to us was less in the future. That's what they were showing. Both of those organizations. Go ahead, Ted.
You're incorporating the cost of the municipality. That's not going to change. So what you have to compare when we're deciding upon our next future contract is the wholesale cost of power, and only the wholesale cost of power, and that includes electricity, capacity, and transmission.
But we do know that their coal is going to be the same price. It's their coal on their property that they're transporting via conveyor belt.
I don't think that's what we're trying to point out here. So let's say
the cost. I'm saying about the cost.
There's more to cost
Increasing.
There's more to cost than just the cost of the coal, though. There's the cost to get it here.
For everyone. Everyone.
That's correct. And we have no.
But they have one of the big costs is going to be flat.
Yeah, but they're increasing the cost of delivery at 4 times the cost of what ComEd is. It's going up at 12% a year over the last 10 years. If we stay on that glide path, our total cost of wholesale power, even when the bonds roll off in 2035, our cost of power will be at $120 a megawatt hour. That's the delivery glide path we are on. And I welcome anybody to check my numbers. I'll sit down with anybody and talk about it. I'm just looking at, I'm using the trend as my friend here, that yes, the cost of the coal and the cost of burning that coal and making electricity down in the MISO grid is cheap. I'll agree to that, for the sake of argument here. It's the cost of getting those electrons through a very complex series of financial transactions. We're not even getting those physical electrons. The electrons are coming from PJM. We're paying those guys to generate down in MISO, and then we're getting credits back and we're having to buy from PJM. And the cost of doing that transaction is expensive in the market, and it's getting more expensive. And like I said, that's not going to do anything. They could be running at full steam down in MISO in 2035, 2036. And if the PJM grid here starts to fall apart from a reliability standpoint, we're going down with it. We need to be evaluating options for reliability here in Naperville or PJM. That's how we're going to secure the power and secure the reliability for our ratepayers here. It doesn't matter whether we stay with IMEA or not. They're not going to be able to fix our reliability concerns that Mark Pruitt and the other gentlemen were talking about. We need to be making investments here in PJM. ideally within the Naperville community. That's how we're going to fix this
What
issue.
you're referring to are transmission charges, correct?
Delivery charges in general, transmission is part of it.
charges, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Correct.
Now, IMEA has a pseudo-tie arrangement with, MISO has a pseudo-tie arrangement with PJM that effectively makes the production of electricity at those coal plants in southern Illinois effectively the same as production in PJM from a financial perspective. Transmission costs are determined through a peak load contribution that's calculated once a year. It's your peak load that you used on certain days of the year. That peak load contribution is multiplied by a transmission fee that's generated by PJM. The transmission cost to deliver power to Naperville is a function of how much power Naperville uses. That's it. Doesn't matter where that power is produced. PJM is controlling transmission charges, not IMEA. IMEA is just a payer of the transmission bill it gets from PJM. So any discussion about increases in transmission costs has nothing to do with the IMEA contract. If there was a coal-fired power plant right down the road, we'd be paying the exact same fees of transmission because PJM sets that rate.
That's incorrect.
I don't think you should be ascribing costs of transmission to IMEA. That's factually incorrect.
I would disagree with that.
I'm sorry?
ComEd's transmission rates currently work out to about $4 a megawatt hour. We're currently paying all in to IMEA for transmitting whatever. They have to do some other transactional things to get the power from the pseudo-tie to us. They are charging us $14 a megawatt hour right now, according to the graph that they did back in February.
That's a function of where the consumption is, not where it's produced.
That's right, but if we had a coal plant right down the street, as you mentioned, it would cost us $4. So there is a big difference there, and that charge for getting those electrons from the generation to us has been increasing at 12% a year on average over the last 10 years, and it's projected to go even higher per IMEA's own numbers in the presentation they gave back in February.
I just wanted to also say, we could debate the cost back and forth all night. But the bottom line is, if we are in a problem now because they want us to make a decision in the next 2 weeks, then you guys have put us in this position. Because if we've had a year and a half, why haven't we had a process? That is what we need. And again, we can debate the prices back and forth. We can debate who has better newspaper articles. But if we don't have a process, that is on you. And we need to have that before we move forward. And the City Council, I don't think, wants to approve this without any process. I can't imagine making a decision of this magnitude without some of these steps.
I think okay. I'm sorry, you finished?
I am finished.
Okay. So I think what we have are people that are involved in this system, some from different angles in the system that disagree. Just as we just said, I can look at your presentation. We looked at everybody's presentation to see what we could do to challenge them, and we did. And if you look at some of the past questions that we had, we left the presenters in an awkward position for everybody because we were looking at how accurate is this information. What we have right now is our electric company is able to give us the best rate with what they do. And you said compliment them. Absolutely compliment them. But the point is the future. And the future looks, from what the presenters made to us and told us, as they did today, is that the future is going to get worse. Some people even say chaotic. And now, we can disagree.
Exactly. We agree. That's why we don't want a monopoly.
We could disagree. And they said, if you have something that you know that's reliable. Now, we've been with IMEA, and when you talk about reliability, there are a couple things that we have to talk about. Our reliability and cost to the people of Naperville.
Reliably high.
Right.
well as
So-
sustainability.
No, no, not as well as sustainability. That's our responsibility, PUAB, when you look at our mission, and I will read our mission to you, is the cost and reliability. Naperville is not going to save the world, an environment.
Clearly.
Especially there's a difference. I have experts that will challenge the credentials of anybody here across the country that are saying different things than what you're saying. So we could say that. We have different experts, and our different experts are coming to different conclusions. Our responsibility is to the city of Naperville and the people of Naperville. There's always going to be a difference of opinion about the environment and the climate. You can find as many, I can find as many people that say opposite what you're saying.
I doubt that because studies show that 70% of Americans
Thank
think
you.
climate change is a serious issue.
That's
and
great.
want to take steps
and why
to
is
mitigate
it that they, why do they feel that way? And maybe it's because they get presentations of this slide of these smokestacks. Where are these smokestacks from?
Marissa.
Okay.
These are from Marissa?
Oh, I thought you were talking about.
No. Where are these smokestacks? I've seen it. I've gone to many NEST
I don't care where they're
presentations.
from. You wish to challenge the physical science basis of climate change
I
and
want
how
to
burning
challenge. No,
fossil
I
fuels
don't, because that's not
works?
that's not what we're here for. That's not what we're here for.
Great. Then
That's
you-
what you're presenting to us.
Then you wish
And
to
that's
say
not what we're saying.
that your evaluation of cost of coal-generated energy is going to completely ignore all climate and environmentally
So
related
the facts that you
externalities.
said-
Yes or no?
The facts that you said were half facts. You
No,
talked
sir, they are
about
not.
sulfur. You talked about fly ash. There is no fly ash that comes out of them when they're done. They recycle all of it. They recycle all of it. And people,
That-
you
that
could
is
laugh.
incorrect.
You could laugh at that.
That-
I went down there. I did a tour. Have you been down there to see what's the plant doing? Oh, you don't care to. Okay, you don't have to.
Average coal plant
The-
across this country, right? Less than 50% of
I
the
know,
fly
thank you.
ash produced by the coal industry in this country is not recycled.
This is
It
not
goes
this
to the-
country. We're talking about Naperville. And our responsibility is to the people of Naperville. And what I'm seeing is misleading information, whether it's photographs or whether it's information as to what they come out with. And I think that's unfortunate because you're misleading people, is what I see. I've came with an open mind to this situation, and the more I see, it doesn't take much to see that there are people doing this to people and presenting something that sounds very bad. The technology, no one mentioned about the technology, the scrubbing technology that they have down there, or whether or not they have any kind of a problem with all these discharges. And I'm going to produce those for the record. The point comes down to, this is not about the environment. This is about what's best for the city of Naperville.
Financially.
Financially,
Say that,
yes.
make sure you say that.
And
in
I
your
will say
recommendation to
that because of the
city
fact of our prices are cheaper than the suburbs around us.
So I've been.
Chairman, can I make a motion?
Yeah.
I find it very, we're not getting anywhere debating our speakers. I think we're at a point where we need to have a discussion just amongst the PUAB members, get the points out on the table that each one of them has, and then move on to whatever the next step is going to be. This is very unfruitful right now.
It
I think
is.
they've got a view, some of us have another view. We're never going to meet in the middle. I think we just need to have a conversation that's internal to the team here, and then move on with whatever the next step is. I'm going to make that motion.
May I say one thing? Please listen to the voices of Naperville residents who care about this. They care about the impact of climate change on future generations, and they don't want this decision made on speculation about what's going to cost less. So please consider, even though you may personally have different opinions or ideas about the value of burning coal, the residents of Naperville care about this. They keep showing up to these meetings. They voted for council members who don't want to extend the IMEA contract. So please listen to their voices as well, because they matter in this decision. Thank you.
I made
Thank
a
you.
motion. I made a
There's
motion.
a motion. Do I hear a second?
Sorry, we're motioning to have a meeting
Uh,
right
to-
now?
Well, no,
terminate the-
to
terminate-
end this, we're finished with the questioning PUA. According to our format that we follow, is that after someone makes a presentation, we ask them questions. What we're talking about is, I don't know that we need a motion for that.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any other questions of Nest that they'd like to ask on the PUAB? Okay, then we will go forward with that. Next, are there any speakers for the next presentation?
There are none that have
Yes.
signed up.
I'm sorry?
There are none that have signed up.
I didn't hear.
There are none that have signed up.
Oh, there are none that signed up. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next report is the report that we've received on the recommendation from Customized Energy regarding an energy procurement and ancillary services strategy for Naperville's electric utility beyond 2035, and provide a board recommendation to utility staff and the city council. Now, with that, I'm going to read, this is the report, it's a public report that's been sent out by them, and I'm going to read just the conclusion instead of the whole report, and I'm going to read within their conclusion. CES recommends that Naperville continues to procure energy and capacity through IMEA while leveraging the MDR clause in its contract to explore renewable energy procurement via PPAs. Now I'm going to open that for discussion or questions by the PUAB.
Well, I have some discussion topics, but it's not about that. Is this a
Well, it
open
has to-
discussion amongst us now?
This is a discussion amongst us. Okay. We will have an opportunity for a discussion amongst us as we go forward with here. Are there any discussions from us regarding the recommendation from CES?
I'll just make a statement that
Yeah.
I cannot, in good conscience, sole source this contract.
Russ? Any comment or no?
I don't know. A lot's been discussed. I agree with the CES recommendation based upon numerous things, but primarily just the fact that it is a low-cost option. I just don't think you're going to find much in the marketplace that's going to compete with this. The advantage that coal plant provides moving forward is significant. And for all the complaining about the high prices over the last 10 to 20 years, now the power plant's going to pay off.
I agree that could very, very likely be true, but let's let IMEA prove it. Let's put it in writing, and let's go through a competitive procurement process instead of just sole sourcing.
And I would be fine with that as long as we don't lose the option. I mean, Brian, what are the likelihood that we don't lose the option if we go down a 6-month process?
Go ahead, Brian.
The contract extension offer that's on the table from IMEA is through April 30th. There is no certainty beyond that date.
Okay. Do we have time to make a request?
To make a request,
Of IMEA for an extension? I mean, is that a reason? Is there room to do that, or are they going to come? I mean, that's pretty much what Michelle is asking for is to get an extension on that option date.
No one has asked for an extension, and 26 members. The only data that I have is that no one has asked for an extension, and 26 members have signed the contract. So I do not have any, I don't have any certainty. None of those options come with certainty.
Well, part of what Michelle is mentioning is that it'd be nice to have them, if we ask them for a documentation showing what the cost is, but then also to open it up to the general. And by doing that, opening up to the regular process, seems to me to guarantee that we lose any control, and we have a good option of losing that as an option. So it's making a decision by not making a decision.
What's giving you that indication?
That's what he just said.
He hasn't said yes or no. There's no harm in asking for an extension.
I have one more comment I want to make on this, is that if we can confirm that the cost of power out of the coal plant is somewhere between $30 and $35, I know for a fact you will not achieve anything near that through an RFP process. Everything that you're going to see is going to be north of $50 or $60 or $70 that far out in the curve. So you're not going to find anything remotely close to $30 to compare it to.
Yeah, I feel like we need to see that in writing.
I'd like to just make a
Yeah,
comment on this. I
This
certainly
is Phil
agree.
talking.
I certainly agree that we get cheap power from them, and we probably would go forward. What I haven't heard is conclusive evidence from anybody that says the #1 requirement for the city of Naperville is the cheapest power. I've never talked to a city of Naperville resident who said, I live here because the energy is cheap. We pay some of the highest property taxes in the U.S. We live in one of the highest, average costs, or have highest average incomes per resident of all the cities in the U.S. I don't know that this is actually a cost decision. How many people in Naperville have chosen to spend $30,000 or $40,000 to put solar panels on their roof? How many people pay premiums to drive hybrid vehicles that don't have a positive ROI? Times have changed where people are electing to make decisions with their wallet. It doesn't always have to do with making the cheapest decision. I'm not saying that we should go make a decision that doubles the cost of energy, but we're not even giving the optionality to that decision. And I think we're being tone deaf to what all the other potential requirements are for the city by potentially just rushing into a contract that's making a decision that starts in 10 years from now for 20 years. I'm trying to think about, like, most of us probably won't even be here then. Some of us won't even be alive. And I'm thinking about my kids at that point going, who made this decision to lock us up into this agreement just simply because it was the cheapest decision 30 years ago? So I'm not saying that cheap power is bad. I just think we're discounting the other considerations that should go into it. I realize we're in a time crunch, but look, I've negotiated contracts with some of the largest companies in the world, and right now it feels like they're leveraging us because they're saying, hey, 10 years from now, you've got this really good deal, but we need you to make the decision now. You said it, Jim, and we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and it's kind of a tough decision, but I also don't think that means that should be the forcing function for us to have to make a decision now. In the interim, I like the idea of being able to go back to them and asking IMEA if there is an option for us to extend this and give us some more time to consider this between now and April 30th. If they come back and say no, then there's a hard decision that needs to be made. But I think we can parallel process this path in the short run until we have a little bit more clarity on really what is most important to the city as we go into making the decision, in addition to just price. Because I think Ness made some good examples about, look at some of the big corporations that are here in Naperville. Have we weighed the costs of what happens if we make decisions like that? Do they leave? Do jobs leave because they don't like the idea of the decisions that we've made to lock ourselves into certain agreements for 30 years? I think there's just a lot of other considerations that need to be taken into account beyond just the cost of electricity.
Jim, go ahead.
Can I address the first part of your comments about was to the effect that, you know, we have one of the highest median income cities around Naperville. I actually prepared a slide or two about that. And Mayor, can you put up slide number 6? This is a report put out by the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and this is specifically about Naperville. And it's a fairly rigorous report. In fact, NEST references it in their Sustainable 2036 report. It uses it as a reference. One of the members of our utility board here assured me that this is legitimate data that's used in the city of Chicago all around. And I saw some interesting figures in here, specifically around household incomes. Well, first of all, the Census Bureau says that Naperville has 4% of its population lives in poverty. And if you look at these numbers that are displayed here, 7% of our population makes less than $25,000 a year. These are households. 9% of our population earns between 25 and 50, and another 9% earns between 50 and 75,000. You know, I'm old enough to remember when $75,000 was a lot of money. But this basically is showing that a quarter of our population lives pretty much day to day. They can't afford solar panels on their roofs. They can't afford, or they're making decisions between food, medicine, and utilities. This notion that we're a rich community and we're enlightened and, you know, we should spend all kinds of money for all of these things that we'd like to have in the world isn't shared by everybody in Naperville. I think we have to be very sensitive to this population. You know, these are single parents that are single parent household. It's listed there. There's 3,000 of them where the parent probably works and they're paying for childcare.
Jim, can I maybe just interrupt you for a second? I think everybody understands that people are at different income levels in the city. And I think that's where gathering more information is helpful. And I think that's the whole point here, is that there's just not enough information for us to make a sound determination. You know, I think slides were presented where other programs in the city took 2.5, 3 years to evaluate, and we are being put under the gun, and I personally feel that way, to make a decision in 40 days. You know, and I think at this point, we've talked enough about it. We need more information, and potentially we need a survey of our citizens in the city about what they want to pay, rather than us just deciding that for them.
Okay, all right. Well, I think I am displaying data here. I'm displaying the fact that, you know, there's a lot of poor folks in this city that
I understand, and I think we should hear from them.
That think that the priority is cost over anything else.
Right, and I don't disagree with you, but right now we're talking.
All right, well, I have more information.
And there's other ways.
I have more information.
Well, I'd like to figure out how long we're going to be here tonight for the chairman.
Okay, well.
Because to the point that was made earlier, we are going on and on and on all these different rabbit holes. We are trying to simply get an answer about whether we can get some basic information from this power company in a short period of time. We still have not been able to make that decision. And I think that has been very clearly put out there, and asking whether we can do that. And I don't know if it takes a motion to get this done or not, but I would so move to get an answer on that decision before we talk about anything else.
Okay, well, thank you for your opinion. I'm going to continue with my discussion, because that's why we're here.
We're not here
All right, so,
an indefinite period of time so that people can hear themselves talk.
Okay, well,
Okay, let's not get personal, but the point is, he had the floor, and you said, excuse me, and you made your point. So I think let him finish.
So there's one more point I'd like to at least make. If you could, Mayor, go to slide 2. Yeah. So these folks here from Nest claim to represent the city of Naperville's feelings or opinion on this issue. I'd like to test that because I know that they can show up in numbers here. They demonstrate that. I give them credit. I mean, these are fine people that have a strong belief in something. They brought their constituencies out here on many occasions. But I would just like to test the fact that they represent what the average Napervillian thinks, because I think that's one of the things we have to understand. So in the Nest Sustainable 2036 report, this statement was made. Do you think that action needs to be taken in Naperville to improve energy efficiency and reduce energy consumption? And according to the pie chart in their report, they claim that 91% of Napervillians agree with that statement. I was going to ask them a bunch of questions about that, but I'm not going to do that. But I would like to point out that Naperville has a energy efficiency program. And in this program, you can, if you want to, you can contribute $5 a month, and that money goes into a pot, and it pays for certain energy efficiency programs like solar, single pane window replacements, air conditioning, tune-ups, insulation. It pays out a certain amount of money. But the interesting fact about the Naperville Energy Efficiency Program is it has about 4,000 people that have subscribed to it. So there's 63,000 account holders in Naperville. And by my interpretation of those numbers, 4,000 people out of 63,000 accounts, that's 6% of the people have put their money where their mouth is. They're willing to pay $5 a month to contribute to a renewable energy program. So what I would have asked Nest, had we were in a debate still, is how do they come up with a number that says 91% of the people believe that we should do something about energy efficiency, but 6% of Napervillians actually do it?
I can kind of speak to some of that. I mean, energy efficiency is kind of my wheelhouse, but I would go to the point of, well, how is our program being promoted? I mean, look, we're all on this board. I mean, before joining the board or even up until recently, how many people on the board were aware or chose to, aware that the programs even existed? I think it's more of a marketing and an awareness thing.
I have an answer. I'm prepared to answer that question. Thank you. You're a good, straight person. This is a letter that comes out in every Naperville bill.
If you are enrolled in paper billing.
Correct. Okay, I get a paper bill. So this is Naperville Connect. This is sent out with my bill. In the January-February issue, it was promoted. I got information from the city's communications department that this connected newsletter was sent out in January, March, April, September, and November in 2020 and 23. It was sent out in January, March, and April of 2024. And here's the January-February issue of 2025. They also posted on social media, Facebook and Twitter, or X now, in February of 22, January of 23, June of 23, April of 24, January of 25. Additionally, they promote it at City of Naperville events, career fairs, STEAM fairs, and it's heavily promoted by Nest.
So ComEd has hundreds of millions of dollars for their energy efficiency programs. We run TV ads, major media. I mean, we do, ComEd does everything to promote their programs. A fraction of their customers know that they exist. So I don't know that.
Okay, well, there's a difference between knowing they exist and deciding to take advantage of them. That's my point. I'll bet you more than 4,000 people know that those programs exist. They just choose not to join them. My point I'm trying to make here is that this 91% number doesn't represent how Napervillians think about at least energy efficiency. And elsewhere in the Sustainability Report 2036, there's a statement that says that these polls, and there's several of these polls that are 80 or 90% in favor of this or that, are taken at Nest events. So, you know, one of the aspects of a good poll is that it should be representative of the population that exists, that you're trying to represent. I don't feel that polls taken at a Nest event represents how Napervillians feel. So I'm just trying to make the point here that if you went out and talked to 100 people out on the street and asked them whether they're willing to pay a lot more for their power for sustainability reasons, I don't think you'd get 91%. I don't think you'd come even close to that. And finally, the only other point I want to try to make about this whole sustainability environmental issue is that these two coal-fired power plants are going to continue running whether Naperville buys this power or not. There's going to be zero net change to environmental emissions whether Naperville buys this power from IMEA or not. So at the end of the day, if you want to speak factually about what's going to happen to the environment when this contract is signed or not signed, there's going to be zero change. So you could almost argue that the environmental equation is off the table as far as Naperville. Now, people may feel bad about that. They may feel that uncomfortable about Naperville buying coal-fired power. But at the end of the day, the environment's going to see no net change. I'm done with my comments for the board.
Thank you, Jim. Now, the comments that we talked about really were at the end of the questioning of the speakers of Nest. At this point, since I'm trying to move the meeting to the very end, at this point, as chairman of the PUAB, I believe that we have sufficiently and appropriately reviewed the issue regarding the contract with the Illinois Municipal Electric Agency, IMEA. Now, there are several members here that have said contrary to that, don't believe that we've done that. I do believe we do. I think we're stuck now at this point of saying whose expert is more expert than my expert, and what is the actual cost. The actual cost that I'm looking at is what I see from the electric company saying that these are the best prices for the people in this area, and that Naperville benefits from that. So as a result of that, I'm calling the question. I would like to read, before I call the question, I would like to read the Public Utilities Advisory Board mission statement, because there's been definitely confusion here as to what our mission is. The Public Utilities Advisory Board serves in an advisory capacity to the City Council on rates, budgets, and capital improvements for the electric, water, and wastewater systems. The board also reviews plans for facilities, expansion, and system improvements. The role of the board also includes hearing complaints from City of Naperville utility customers regarding claims of violations of their right to privacy and addressing such complaints as appropriate. Now that's what our mission is, not the environment. And yes, we all have strong feelings one way or the other. We even talked about we should be transitioning. We all want to transition. What's possible to transition right now, I don't believe is going to happen that fast. So I think we have to give ourselves, the city, a chance. I also believe that we have to give this city an opportunity to look at the best we can in the future because of the information that's been given to us. And what is that information? Power is going to go up. It's going to be more difficult for someone to go out and purchase power, 10 years from now in particular. So, do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, what's the motion? What kind of?
I'm asking for a motion right now.
What kind of motion are you looking for?
A motion, I just said as chairman, I believe that we have sufficiently and appropriately reviewed the issue regarding the contract with the Illinois Municipal Electric Agency. Prior to calling the question, I believe we're done, that we've done what we're supposed to do. We can keep on having more and more presentations here. What that does, it guarantees, it eliminates one of the options that we have, one of the options that's been working for us. And that I think the same number of people believe is good for Naperville. So that's why I wanted to read the mission statement prior to the calling the question or the hearing the motion. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we recommend to the Naperville City Council that they accept the recommendation of Customized Energy Solutions, that the City of Naperville continue to procure energy capacity and ancillary services through IMEA by entering into a new contract with IMEA, which will allow the city to procure a member-directed resource. Additionally, we recommend that the member-directed resource provision of the new contract be explored immediately, and that City Council pursue the highest load factor, zero carbon resources available.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
There's a second. Is there discussion now about that? That would supplement what we've already said? Because I think there's definitely a point. People want to have more. I'm saying more is not going to produce any different information. I think we still have the cheapest form of energy arriving. If no one else is going to bring up the discussion, I'm going to make some points to be put into the record. As I did with all of the presentations, I had access to it because it was put publicly. Same time, the week of our meetings, I looked at it, and I saw that there was information. It's too bad that people left. But the information talking about the fly ash and the picture that was describing, if someone wants to look at it, I wouldn't want to live next to that type of smokestack either. But that's not the smokestack down there at Prairie State. And that I have a document here that they put out that US EPA and Illinois EPA has an environmental record with them, which is within compliance. And this document here shows the things that they do that will not produce that kind of a plume. Nitrogen oxide, 85% removal. Sulfur dioxide, 98% removal. Particulate material, 99% removal. Mercury, 90% removal. And we asked about the 90% versus why is it not 99? And it depends on the coal and the process that you use. So I'd like to put this in the record. I'd like to also, because some of the representations of, I'll just say some of the representations about what's happening down there in Prairie State. I have contacted people that live down there. I talked to David A. Mayer, chairman of the board of Washington County, Illinois, and he's been involved in the local community government of Washington County for over 30 years. As chairman of Washington County Board, I've experienced the beginning and building and continued development of Prairie State Generating Company. They are well respected in many of our communities. Their work has increased tax income for Washington County in many ways. And then he has a list of all the things that they've benefited from, and he talked about that they have a good relationship with Prairie State. Management has proven to be very beneficial. They talk about the byproducts that they make for fertilizer, gypsum and wallboard, and other cement ingredients that does not go into any landfill that was presented here. I also have a letter from Joseph Wheeler, Marissa Alternative School Project UP Coordinator, teacher, and he's writing to inform of what he thinks has been the benefit of being there near Prairie State. They're about 7 miles from there, and he talks about the ways that they mentor their children and that they've had no problem with other issues with the Prairie State. They've hired some of the kids, but they also help the kids and they present. There's lists of things that Prairie State, and I like to put these two letters into the record, that they also do a number of other charitable things besides. And no one ever mentioned to me about that it was very, very foggy and cloudy because of their discharges, or that there was ground pollution or water pollution. That's been presented again to this board from the board from the organization that comes here.
Louis, can I?
My name, pardon me?
Can I ask a question or
Yeah.
make a comment? So I actually totally agree with you that I mean, if you look at our mission statement as a board, it's all about cost and reliability. And I feel like a lot of what you're covering is like health and sustainability stuff, which is fine because
It's to
obviously.
counter the information that was presented. I was going to present this during the talking of the questions of Nest, but it wasn't allowed.
Okay.
So I have another letter from, this relates to Trimble County generating statement from John Ogborn. He's the county judge executive, Trimble County, and he goes through a number of where they have a clean environment down there, the employment, and the positive things. I mean, it's 2 pages. I want to put that into the record. And I have one other final letter that has come from Jonathan Lesser, PhD, President of Continental Economics, Senior Fellow of National Center for Energy Analytics. And this is a paragraph. There is a huge amount of literature on resource costs. The fundamental problem with wind/solar, the environmental groups recoil from nuclear, even though it's emission-free. And I didn't hear anything presented about nuclear, but that's okay. We're just presenting this, is that it is intermittent, when wind and solar, and requires backup from battery storage, which is hugely expensive. That's why so-called levelized costs of energy for wind and solar are deceptive and cannot be used to compare with generating resources that are always available. Moreover, you can read about fires at battery storage plants, most recently the large fire at PG&E's Moss Landing facility, the 4th fire there since 2019. When you include backup costs, wind, solar are far more costly than natural gas. Furthermore, higher electricity costs mean reduced economic growth because consumer businesses must spend more on electricity, which leaves less to spend on other goods, less to invest, and raises the cost of goods and services. Finally, I would point out that Naperville's ending its contract will have no measurable impact on climate. China is building hundreds of new coal plants, in part for the electricity needed to manufacture wind turbines and solar panels to sell in the U.S. Nothing the U.S. does will have an impact, will have a measurable impact on climate. I hope this is helpful. And then I have his bio. With that, I want to put that into the record. Is there any other discussion at this point?
Yeah, Chairman, I have just a
Yeah, go
clarifying
ahead.
question. So based on your motion and the 2 seconds, does that mean that this board is going to recommend to the city council that they move forward with the recommendation to renew the contract?
If we have enough votes, yes.
Enough votes by,
Because I said basically, this isn't going to change anybody's mind to continue doing this. Even with the facts that we have, because what raised this whole price cost issue is distrust that IMEA is lying to us, and we're part of IMEA.
I'm just trying to get clarification on what the process of what happens next in the
Yeah.
decision process, and that's not clear to me.
Okay, so there's a motion standing, it was seconded, we had a discussion about it. Then we have, after I have not heard any more discussion about it, I'm going to call the question and say, those in favor, raise their hand. Those opposed, raise their hand. And that'll be whether or not we make a recommendation to the city council. Now, the city council can do anything they want. I will be able to at least say for us, we stayed within the timeline. We've reviewed it. We've had 3 meetings dedicated specifically to this. We've had as long a meeting as probably Naperville has ever had in any of their programs. And I'll tell you, I know some of us, I've traveled, I've gone down there, we've gone to see where IMEA is in Springfield, asked them tough questions too, and I feel that I understand not everybody can do that. I felt my responsibility was to get as much information as I possibly can. And I want to stay within the timeline that gives Naperville all of its options, because I think it's inappropriate for us not to give Naperville, because if we want to delay, it takes out, I believe, potentially an option.
Can
Will
we
it?
confirm
I can't
that?
guarantee it.
Yeah, can we
but-
confirm that? Like, can we ask IMEA for a 1 year, an additional year to make a decision? I mean. As part of our recommendation. Yeah.
Well, as part of our recommendation, it'd have to be, well, we have to vote on our motion right now. We have a motion right now that we have. that's
And that
been
motion
seconded.
does not include that recommendation
Does
or
not,
ask,
no,
right?
it does
Okay.
not. I don't believe that if it did, I think it would eliminate one of our options, is what I believe.
But we don't know for certain.
Nothing stops us from asking IMEA to do anything based upon.
They could still be asked to
based
do that
upon this motion.
after the motion,
We're
for
not-
sure.
We're not stopping all work on this.
It's obvious that the city of Naperville's city council is not going to make the deadline. It's not on us, it's on what they decide to do now. And so we can ask, what's the options and all that, but that's not part of this motion. It's whether or not we are going to recommend it or not, because I think that's where we are.
I would hope that the city council asks us to work with them on this issue from this point forward, because I don't think it's going to end right here. But this board is basically done with what it's going to do. We've had these 3 long meetings. There's no others planned. I'm not seeing any new information coming to the table. So I think, well, I would suggest we vote
yeah.
on this and get it over with, and then do
Which
whatever
is
it is we have to
one
do
of the
from this
reasons
point
why,
forward.
I wanted to include Nest when I called Ted. Surprised him, surprised everybody, I think, thinking, well, they haven't had an opportunity to make their point known. So we did that, including the experts that we had legally and for others that other cities have used. And I think it would be the appropriate thing to do, to vote for it. I think we meet our requirement as far as making it best, whatever's best for Naperville at this point.
Chairman, the talk around going back to IMEA to ask about the option to have an extension, do we have to motion to make that request, O'Brien, or can that be made?
No, we can just ask them to do that.
Okay.
So, is there any further discussion on this? I think we've.
I guess I'd
Oh,
like
go
to
ahead.
formally ask Brian, then could you please ask IMEA if we could have an extension to make this decision, whether it's, 6 months, 12 months?
That can't be, that's not a motion.
Oh, correct.
No, it's not a motion.
But I just,
So
you
could
said we had
ask.
to formally ask
You
him.
can
I'm
ask,
formally
I know,
asking.
but you're right, you can ask, okay, during the discussion, you can ask him, not a motion, you could ask him, is that possible, or would he try to do that for us? You could ask that as part of the discussion to anybody to whoever this board wants to ask. Okay, I think that's been made. So now, at this point, I will call for a vote. Those in favor of the motion to go
Chairman.
forward, pardon me?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we will do a roll call vote.
Oh, do a roll call vote. Okay, well, that's, okay, very good, thank you. So, Mayor, you want to go ahead and,
Yeah.
well, I will ask for those in favor of the motion to go forward with IMEA, so signify to Mayor. Raise your hand.
I'll call the
Oh,
names.
you'll call the motion. Okay, I call it.
Abbas? Is that a yes or a no? Okay. Brendan?
No.
James?
Jim?
Jim?
Yes.
Louis?
Yes.
Michelle?
No.
And Phil?
No.
And Ross? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Just to clarify, your response was yes to the question or to that you could hear us?
Both, yes.
Both, yes. Okay. Very good. Okay, so the motion has passed.
Yes.
Is there any other discussion or anything else that people want to discuss or say at this point? No. So do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So I'd just like to make one recommendation, is that we keep working on this as a utility board. This is pretty important. I think that, you know, future utility board meetings should discuss this more. And not only this, but other future options ahead of Naperville in terms of its utility supply, short-term and long-term. I hope this isn't the end of this discussion.
It might be. If this moves forward, there won't be anything else to discuss. But time will tell.
Well, I think, yeah, we'll see how fast the city council wants to go forward on this. You know, that's another time frame thing. I think it is important that if we're serious about transitioning, I think then we have to talk about other things that this board can have a positive impact for the city of Naperville in transitioning and the options of that. Well, if you think that the transitioning is that fast, you know. Well, okay.
Well, what's in our control, Phil, is that we're a member of IMEA, and IMEA has to make decisions on how to fill the gaps when Prairie State's required to drop its load by 40% 3 years after the contract starts, and then they shut down only 7 years after that, along with Trimble County #1. So IMEA has a lot of choices to make on where they're going to fill those gaps from when CEJA requires those shutdowns. So I would think that as a board member with 30% of the load coming, or 30% of IMEA's load, that will have a lot to say about how some of that renewable energy gets or fills those gaps when the coal plants start shutting down. So
Okay.
remember, Prairie State's got to shut down by 50, or reduce rate by 50% only 3 years after this contract would start. So there's a lot of decisions to be made about that long before that happens. It took 9 years to develop B Hollow. So hopefully we'll be more engaged with IMEA if we continue with them about what they will do when those coal plants start shuttering. I guess that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, we're going to, I need a second for the motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye? Yeah, we need to say aye. Thank you. We're adjourned.